My dad, Larry Linton, the only true servant leader willing to stand in the arena and fight for your freedoms.
Larry is a man of God, and he will move heaven and earth to protect the people in district.
Too many elected politicians act like chameleons.
My name's Mike. I'm Larry's neighbor. I bought the house behind him. I trust Larry to give me an honest answer.
And what's important to me is faith, family, and my freedom. And I believe these values are also held by Larry Linton.
More important than ever, I believe, in our lifetime to really stand up and fight for what's right. And Larry's doing that, and I'm supportive of it.
We need to replace career politicians in Nashville with leaders willing to stand for what is right, even if it's not popular. People who feel a calling and are not looking to make a profession out of it.
You're not going to find a more honest, straightforward, and passionate individual, I don't believe. Larry is what you see is what you get. He's honest.
Listen, if you are looking for a true conservative who's passionate about the state of Tennessee, the people that live in it, and wanting to make a difference in a meaningful way, Larry's your guy.
Good morning, folks, and boy, is it good to be home. As usual, I've been busy since I returned home. There were the normal chores to catch up on, of course, and then my girls and I, we attended a concert in Knoxville this past Thursday night. I can tell you, after not attending one in more than a decade, it was a lot to handle. The band was called Switchfoot, and I was only familiar with one of their songs. The worship team at my church played one of their songs during a service in the past, and it was titled, I Dare You to Move, which is a wonderful song, but not at all like the other songs on that evening's playlist. The venue the concert was played at was the Tennessee Theater. It's a wonderful building, but the acoustics in that place were not at all to my liking. Too much volume in too small of a venue. The music was overpowering, and I could not make out any of the lyrics at all. Unless I put my fingers in my ears, then I could make out some of the words. The girls and I had a great time otherwise, though. Dinner in Market Square and some walking around. It was precious time spent with my girls that is irreplaceable. Then Denise and I got to spend this weekend dog sitting for our daughter while she went with her friend on a bachelorette weekend. Let me tell you, our one Australian Shepherd, combined with three more, they are a lot to handle at one time. Especially Kaylee's youngest, who just happens to be a standard size Australian Shepherd. Well, the three older ones are minis of various sizes. The standard one is like Lenny from Of Mice and Men. Huge, clumsy, and doesn't know his own strength. Plus, he's a bit neurotic. Every time Denise and I moved, even if it was just sitting in the chair on the couch, the big goofball had to get right up in our face to see if we were doing something of interest to him. Heck, even just picking up the water bottle to get a drink would call him into action. I was supposed to help some friends of mine from Middle Tennessee deliver some relief supplies this weekend, but circumstances beyond their control delayed their departure for a couple of weeks. Even so, Denise and I really appreciate the efforts our church has made to help those families impacted by Hurricane Helene here in East Tennessee through donations of materials and money. The efforts made by our church and many other churches and individuals throughout the area really led to the title of this week's show. I'm quite sure many of you have seen the footage on the television and internet, as well as many of the stories coming out of the areas most heavily impacted by the flooding and about the complete incompetence, ineptitude, misfeasance, as well as malfeasance by government agencies in the recovery and assistance efforts. There is more recent news on that front as well that it points out the truth of the phrase I often use on this program, and that is, our government hates us. So now with a recap and the intro out of the way, let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast, where I will demonstrate that it is a lie that our government will come to your rescue. There is nobody other than us as individuals that is coming to our rescue, at least on this temporary home. So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. I want to kick off this segment once again by offering my assistance to any Sevier County Republican voter that wants to vote early and would like a ride to one of the voting locations. If that is you, please let me know. You can reach out to me through any of my social media accounts, or you can send me an email. The email address is larry@libertyleadershipandlies.com. That's all one word, no punctuation. larry@libertyleadershipandlies.com. Now, early voting begins this coming Wednesday, the 16th of October, and it runs through Halloween, the 31st of October. You can vote early at the Election Commission office, which is located at 1145 Dolly Parton Parkway in Sevierville, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and from 9 a.m. to noon on Saturday. Or you can also vote early at the early voting satellite location on the same days and hours. That location is the Seymour Public Library, located at 137 West Macon Lane in Seymour. I will be sharing that information on my website and social media pages as well, all the way through the early voting period. Now, due to my scheduled engagements with my client, I will be taking advantage of early voting this year as well. Heck, even if I weren't going to be out of state on election day, I would still be early voting, as I am encouraging all of my listeners to do the same. With all of the stuff happening all over the country right now, I would not be surprised if something happened on election day that would serve to prevent the massive amount of votes I am thinking will happen. We must bank our votes, and we must bank them right now to ensure that they are counted. We can deal with the election season later down the line, but we have a mission this year. Over the course of these next 3 weeks, we have a mission to ensure we stem the decline of our republic and keep the commies from maintaining control of the White House. Before we get deep into the show, just another quick programming type announcement. Many of you, my wife included, have informed me about some issues with the audio for the show. After going back and listening to the past couple of shows, I'm acutely aware of the problems with the sound quality on the show. I have now found out that apparently the audio that is heard on various platforms the show is on is vastly different than the audio quality on the raw segments that I edit on my laptop. There are many reasons behind this, I believe, but first and foremost is probably the locations where I record the show. The shows recorded in my home Goat Locker studio, they have a better sound quality than the ones I record in the many different hotel rooms I'm in while I'm on the road. That is a problem I really can't do anything about, though, as I am sure that I cannot modify the rooms I stay in to have the same acoustic qualities as my home office. But I believe I have found the true culprit behind the recent degradation in sound quality, and that would be the microphone that I was using while on the road. A few weeks ago, I purchased a different microphone that is easier to transport and much lighter for when I'm doing the show while on the road. Now, my normal microphone weighs about 4 pounds with the stand, and it takes up a lot of space. And the new one I began using a couple of shows ago is one of those lapel microphones it's only a couple of ounces. Not too big of a deal, you may be thinking, but remember, there is a weight allowance on checked baggage at the airport, and with the colder weather settling in, I've had to add a lot more cold weather clothing to my travel kit. And that warm weather gear will be with me for a while, since I will be conducting my coaching engagements in Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota for the foreseeable future. So I sacrificed microphone weight for warmer clothing. I'm recording this show using my standard Blue Yeti microphone in the Goat Locker studio, so the sound quality for this show should be much better than the past few weeks. I'll forego using the lapel microphone for the shows I record while on the road, so that I can provide a better quality product going into the future. Okay, so now let's get on with the show. The main theme is that we all must recognize the lie that our government, be it state or national, our government is not going to come to our rescue. There was a period in our nation's history where nobody believed that was ever the case, except in times of war, because that is how our government and our uniquely American society is designed. We began as a nation of rugged individualists that mostly relied on ourselves in times of trouble or disaster. Of course, we could rely on our neighbors and our local churches to help out when things got bad, but we rarely, if ever, looked to the government to be our safety blanket, so to speak. It was only after government and its useful idiots started spreading the lie that it was government's function to be that safety blanket. A lie which in turn was also used as the reason for the many confiscatory taxes and fees that are necessary for the various levels of government to perform the function of safety blanket for the citizens. Each new promise from the government on how they would, quote unquote, help the people of this country in a variety of circumstances, each of those promises comes with an increased tax or fee burden on we the people. Keep in mind, folks, the federal and state governments do not provide a product or service meant to turn a profit. When you boil down the government's intended functions, and not the ones they state they provide today, but governments, they are formed to provide for the common defense and to promote the general welfare. And not to be confused with the general welfare of creating a welfare state. And we've discussed that many times on this show before. Government, at every level in our constitutional republic, is created to secure the people's liberty, not to become their new parents. And since they do not create that product or service for a profit, that means they can only function from revenue they receive from taxes, fees, or tariffs. Now, we could explore that topic for weeks and weeks, but let's keep it simple for this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. In order for government to provide a function, they must raise the revenue needed to pay for that function. Let's take public education and prior to 1980 as an example. In order for your state and local government to provide an education to children, those two levels of government must raise the revenue needed to put the infrastructure into place, such as buildings, transportation, materials, as well as payroll for the educators. They raise that revenue by various methods, but primarily through property taxes and statewide sales taxes. Voila, the money paid by the citizens. All of them, by the way, not just the citizens with children in the public education system. The money paid by the citizens for those taxes funds the public education system. Now, there's plenty wrong with the public education system as it currently is operated in our nation today, but that is how it's primarily supposed to function. And like many states, here in Tennessee, the Constitution grants the state government in Article 11, Section 12, grants the General Assembly the authority to, quote, provide for the maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools, unquote. We, the people of Tennessee, gave the state government that authority in the Constitution. Now, if you were to read the federal Constitution, no such authority was granted to the federal government by the states to do that. Yet here we are. We are living under a system whereby the national government usurped that authority from the states and is taking our tax dollars in the form of an income tax primarily among them to, quote, provide for that maintenance, support, and eligibility standards of a system of free public schools. But I digress, which is often the case when talking about the federal government's usurpations of the people's and the state's powers and authorities, all to get around to this point where the government is taking our money, our sweat equity, to, quote unquote, come to our rescue in just about every situation we can encounter in our lives. But most especially in situations where the states and the people did not grant the federal government that particular power, like healthcare, for instance. I bet you thought I was going to talk about the government failing to use all that money as taken from the citizens of these United States to come to our rescue during the recent hurricanes. I will. But first, I have to address an issue where not only did the government fail to provide a promised service using our tax dollars, but it also caused irreparable harm to the people, to our children. I'm going to go back here to 2021, 2022 in particular, and talk a bit about the jab. I told the lovely and talented Denise that I would be speaking on this subject once again, and she told me I was going to get banned once again on several social media platforms. Whenever somebody tells me I'm going to get in trouble for doing something, I always think about this scene from the movie Inglorious Basterds. It captures exactly how I feel when somebody tells me that the overlords in our society, be it government or big tech, when somebody tells me that I'm going to get into big trouble with those people. Well, here's how I feel and how I respond.
You'll be shot for this?
Nah, I don't think so. More like chewed out. I've been chewed out before.
So here comes some information about how our government used our own tax dollars to injure our children. In a recent article published on Reform Pharma Now's Substack, written by Megan Redshaw, this information comes to us. Now, I'm going to be quoting from the article extensively now, so pay attention. Since the authorization of the COVID-19 vaccines for children and adolescents in 2021, health officials have reassured the public that vaccine-related heart inflammation, myocarditis, and pericarditis is rare, and claim children were at a higher risk of developing myocarditis from the virus. However, in a recent preprint study involving over 1.7 million children, researchers found that myocarditis and pericarditis occurred only in vaccinated children, raising serious questions about the risk-benefit analysis that was used to justify widespread vaccination in younger populations. Now, I've been going over a little bit of time here, so I'm going to take a brief break right here and come back on the other side with more from that article and how it ties into this week's title. So please stick with me. And we're back. Picking up where we left off in the article about the jab, folks. The large-scale study referred to in the Reform Pharma Now article utilized data from the Open Safely TPP database. That is a resource that tracks health outcomes in a large population of children and adolescents across England. Researchers followed children ages 5 to 15 and compared those who received one vaccine dose to unvaccinated controls and those who received 2 vaccine doses with those who received a single dose. The study assesses both of the vaccine's effectiveness in preventing COVID-19 outcomes, such as positive tests, emergency room visits, hospitalizations, and death, as well as its safety concerning non-COVID related events, including heart inflammation, emergency department visits, and hospitalizations. Amongst 820,926 previously unvaccinated adolescents, researchers found that vaccinated adolescents were initially 26% less likely to test positive for COVID-19 compared to their unvaccinated peers. However, by 20 weeks post-vaccination, the likelihood of testing positive was nearly the same for both groups. Similarly, among 441,858 adolescents who received one vaccine dose compared to those who received 2 doses, the second dose initially reduced the rate of positive tests by 33%. Yet, here we go again, by 14 weeks post-vaccination, infection rates between the 2 groups were nearly identical. This presents important questions about the long-term efficacy of COVID-19 vaccination in children. While the vaccine appeared to reduce the risk of emergency visits and hospitalizations due to COVID-19, these outcomes were already rare in children, vaccinated or not. In the 5 to 11 age group, COVID-related outcomes were so rare that the researchers were unable to calculate the precise estimates of vaccine effectiveness. Hospitalizations and emergency department visits related to COVID-19 were minimal across both vaccinated and unvaccinated children, highlighting the low risk of severe disease in that age group. Moreover, the vaccine had little to no effect on non-COVID outcomes like fractures, indicating it did not influence general healthcare utilization. The study did not report any COVID-19 related deaths for either vaccinated or unvaccinated children. Now, here's the really informative part of the article, folks, and really gets at the heart of the matter and the title of this week's show. Not only isn't the government coming to our rescue, often it hurts those whom it is claiming to help, and doing it with our tax dollars. Continuing to quote from the article, the most concerning finding of the study relates to myocarditis and pericarditis, which were observed exclusively in vaccinated children and primarily after their first vaccine dose. Myocarditis is heart muscle inflammation that can lead to cardiac arrhythmia, cardiac arrest, stroke, and death. The National Organization for Rare Disorders states that myocarditis can result from infection, but is more commonly a result of the body's immune reaction to the initial heart damage. Pericarditis is inflammation of the sac surrounding the heart. According to the study, 27 cases of myocarditis occurred per million vaccinated individuals following the first vaccine dose. The rate dropped to 10 cases per million after the second dose. But not a single unvaccinated child in the study was diagnosed with myocarditis or pericarditis. That raises serious concerns about the safety of the jab in the younger populations. It is, as we suspected, unfortunately, pediatric cardiologist Dr. Kirk Milhone told Reform Pharma in an email. Dr. Milhone believes that even a small risk of heart inflammation for adolescents who are not at risk from COVID-19 is too much of a risk. Before administering a medication, vaccination, or performing a medical procedure, Dr. Milhone checks to see if the benefits outweigh the risk or if there's any benefit at all. According to an April 2023 paper published by the Cleveland Clinic, more vaccines come with an increased risk of experiencing COVID-19, suggesting that there isn't a benefit to vaccination for most people. In the preprint study, researchers monitored for myocarditis and pericarditis by tracking diagnoses recorded in medical records through that database we discussed earlier. The data were gathered from hospitalizations, emergency department visits, and primary care records to capture the diagnosis of heart inflammation. Now, however, Dr. Milhone has a long voiced concerns about silent myocarditis in those who develop heart inflammation following vaccination but are unaware of it. Standard diagnostic tools like EKGs, troponin levels, and echocardiograms often miss silent myocarditis, making it challenging to diagnose accurately. The gold standard for detecting this condition is cardiac MRI, which provides more detailed imaging and can reveal scarring or inflammation undetectable by those traditional methods. A 2022 study published in The Lancet found that 81 out of 151 patients who underwent cardiac MRI showed heart abnormalities, such as late glandular enhancement, which is a marker linked to worse outcomes, including heart failure and sudden cardiac death. Now, given the limitation of standard tests, the actual number of myocarditis cases following vaccination may be significantly higher than reported. Although the CDC claims that myocarditis following COVID-19 vaccination is rare and mild, the agency uses a narrowed case definition. This allows it to exclude cases of silent myocarditis, cardiac arrest, ischemic strokes, and deaths from heart problems that occur before the individual reaches the emergency department. It remains unclear how these cases are tracked or whether they included in the CDC's myocarditis statistics, which raises further questions about the transparency and accuracy of the CDC data. Now, with all that being said that was in that report, how much do you think the national government in Washington, D.C. spent on the jab? Well, from a paper published on the National Institute of Health's own website more than a year ago, March of 2023 to be precise, The cost to the taxpayers was nearly $32 billion. That is billion with a B. $32 billion. Not of the government's money. That was our money. Our money, which the government then used to poison and injure children. Now, we have to couple that information that our government used our money to injure children during the scandemic with the information that we have found out over the course of the past 3 or so weeks now about how the government came to the rescue during the recent hurricanes. We learned that when it comes to an actual emergency, not a fake one manufactured by the government that turned a virus, no worse than the influenza virus, into a situation where the government gave itself immense powers to shutter churches and businesses, to determine who is and who's not an essential worker, to close schools. Again, education is not a function or power granted the federal government by the states or the people, but it also gave them the power to lock people in their homes, house arrest. Some state governors took that power to an extreme, even here in Tennessee. Few governors were worse, though, than the current governor of Minnesota and vice presidential candidate Tampon Tim Walz. He actually authorized his state's law enforcement to fire rubber bullets and tear gas or pepper spray into a group of reporters. That article is still available on the LA Times website while the national media is promoting him as the second coming of whoever. We also learned that the tax dollars taken from the citizens at the end of the barrel of a gun, if you doubt me on that, refuse to pay your federal taxes and find out what happens. We learned that the federal government used the taxpayers' money not to respond to emergencies affecting the citizens, but to provide criminal, illegal immigrants our sweat equity. Not only that, when the federal agency charged with handling emergencies within the borders of our own country started bleeding that they were running out of money, we then learned that the federal government was still handing out our tax dollars to foreign countries, like Lebanon. Here at home, quite the different story. The citizens here of these United States, they can work their whole life, pay their taxes dutifully, obey the law, end up losing our own homes or even family members during a hurricane, and you may or may not get $750 per family in assistance from the federal government. Oh, and that assistance, it may depend upon the melanin content of your skin, whether you receive that money or not. Meanwhile, if you are a criminal in a foreign land, like one of the many countries in South and Central America, you can illegally cross our southern border, terrorize American citizens, and commit crimes against those citizens. Do you know what happens? Well, the organization charged with responding to natural disasters and the damaging effects from them on American citizens, which would be FEMA, well, that government agency will give you a debit card with $5,000 on it, a free cell phone, mortgage assistance, and food stamps. That is just on the national level, ladies and gentlemen. Please stick with me after this quick break for God's Word, along with my closing thoughts and a bit of information about how our state governments are not even coming to the rescue as well. I also have a special message from Pastor Jack Hibbs and Dr. Frank Turek I would like to share. It's a video clip I shared on social media, but also want to include it in this week's podcast because we have a mission to accomplish over the next few weeks, folks. So I'll be right back. And we're back for the closing thoughts for this week, folks. I hope that you all really, really understand the message this week. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, is coming to our rescue. Our government was never meant, nor constitutionally designed, to rescue us from viruses or natural disasters. Our founding fathers understood the resiliency and the fortitude of the citizens of the nation they had established, and knew that the rugged individualists, along with their neighbors, and yes, even the church, they would be the bulwark that stood between anarchy and the people in times of crises like fires, floods, hurricanes, and yes, even viruses. When our government inserted itself into that role, at the end of a gun, by the way, It was done so that it could place itself as the perceived savior. What we have been witness to for more than a century now is that the government cannot do that. We have even witnessed our government using our money to actively harm our children in the name of helping us, what they tell us, but it's really about control. Our government has used our hard-earned tax dollars to, quote unquote, assist every country on the planet. But when the feces hits the rotating device here at home, suddenly they are out of money, but are willing to loan the citizens their own money as a stopgap measure until the rugged individualist, turned into a nanny state sheep, can get their insurance to pay the costs of rebuilding. Yes, even here in Tennessee, our trans-publican governor is emulating the corrupt national government. In a recent statement, Governor Bill Lee announced the HEAL program that will dedicate $100 million to assist East Tennessee communities in the recovery efforts from the damage caused by Hurricane Helene. Except that assistance comes in the form of interest-free loans of our own tax dollars. This is from the same state government that gave $1 billion of free money to Ford and $500 million of free money to the Tennessee Titans NFL football team. But us Tennesseans, we don't get any of that quote unquote free money. We have to pay it back without interest, of course, because our government is so kind and caring for its citizens, right? If we keep putting these people in national and state office, either through uninformed voting or through the apathy of not participating, we get the government we deserve. Now, as promised, I want to play a message from Pastor Jack Hibbs and Dr. Frank Turek. Please give it a listen. And if you know of any Christian on the fence during this upcoming presidential election, or even a Christian that will be voting for the communists, share this portion of the podcast with them. So here it is.
Jack, here is a very penetrating question from Miguel. In fact, we talked a little bit about this before we went on the air. Do you think that God has abandoned the United States, and that's why we have messed up politics and we've advanced child mutilation and horrible sins? Jack.
Wow. How did Miguel know what we were talking about before service? I mean, before this. Miguel, I would commend to you to read Deuteronomy chapter 28 all the way through, nice and slow. You have asked the question that I believe is the most important question that can be asked right now. And I'll answer it this way. The direction of the United States in this upcoming election literally lies in the hands of the church. I mean that with all of my heart, and I believe I can prove it. God didn't cause COVID, but he used it. COVID purified the church. Then the next test was Israel, and the church was purified again. And now we're at this point where we are going to choose between a Marxist. By the way, she got away with that the other night. Trump called her out that her father was a famous Marxist professor. Are we going to allow that to happen as a church? Forget the unbeliever. Are we going to vote God right out of the United States because we kicked him out of school? We kicked him out of the Supreme Court. We kicked him out of the public square. This is the last call. I believe this is the last call. The only hope for the United States of America, I believe, Miguel, is what the church does in the next couple months. Does she even care enough to vote wisely in a way that might honor God, or just decide to go to the beach and surf that day or go fishing instead?
Almost half of evangelicals don't vote. Almost half.
Apathy.
I submit to you, Jack, that if you take a biblical view of morality and you vote a biblical view of morality with regard to the policies that the candidates are going to put in place, that you don't need to convince one moderate, you don't need to convince one liberal, you don't need to convince one leftist, you just need to convince the church to vote biblically. and many of our political problems will be solved. But let me hasten to add one other thing. We could put all the right laws in place. You know, Israel had all the right laws in place,
right,
and they were still judged. Laws are important, but they're not as important as revival, Jack.
That's right.
They're not as important as getting people saved and sanctified.
That's
We've
right.
got to do both. We can't just do one or the other. We have to do both. You know, our mutual friend Charlie Kirk puts it this way. He says, the most important thing is that we can lead people to become disciples of Jesus. The second most important thing is that we have the freedom to do the first thing.
That's right.
The most important thing.
Remember, folks, it is not the person we are voting for. It is the policies. Now, this week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of James, chapter 4, verse 17. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. Do not sit this election out, people. Don't let your friends sit this election out. If you want to maintain some semblance of freedom in our great republic, vote on the policies of freedom, of economic resurgence, not on the policies of castrating kids or murdering babies in the womb, or open borders that allow terrorists to roam our streets freely. Well, that's it for this week, folks. Until next week, stand in the arena with me. Reveille, it's time to wake up.